I don't really do product reviews on this channel. Nobody sends me gear, so I have to pay for it myself. It kind of limits what you can do for product reviews. I also don't generally like the idea of telling people what they should buy because everybody's needs are different. And honestly, you can make most things work just fine with without spending a ton of money. But I did recently pick up PreSonus's fairly recent Revelator io44 interface, and I have some thoughts. Before I dive into all the negative things, I want to talk about some of the reasons why you might be looking at buying it, and then you can maybe understand why it's a little bit disappointing that it turned out the way it did. So the Revelator io44 is the latest in PreSonus's Revelator series, along with their dynamic microphone that they added recently. And it offers you one XLR or quarter-inch input, a headphone output that also has a headset mic input, so it's a headset jack, not just a headphone jack. And then it has a stereo 3.5 millimeter line input. This sounds really great. It's all in a fairly small box. I'd show it here, but I'm sending it back, so I don't have it on me anymore. This means that I could do things like plug in my mic to the XLR input. If I'm feeling lazy that day, I could plug my headset into the headset input instead of using the mic. I could plug my switch into the 3.5 millimeter line input. So that way, if I want to play Monster Hunter online with my friends, I can pull up Discord and chat with them while still hearing the switch in my headphones. This is a great little device. It's also got two virtual outputs, so you could send your voice chat to one of those and then take advantage of the two stream mixes that it offers to create your own submixes. So you can hear them at one level, you can record them at a different level or mute them completely. So it makes for a great little device for streamers. It's also got onboard effects using DSP processing. So it's basically zero latency effects that you can add. So noise gates, EQ, compression, a limiter, and a handful of kind of fun little effects. Unfortunately, that's kind of where the good stuff ends. And I want to talk about why. So when I first got the interface, my first experience was plugging it in and getting no output. I had everything routed correctly in the virtual mixers, just couldn't hear anything. And eventually just unplugging it, plugging it back in seemed to fix it for no particularly good reason. So whatever, fine, I dealt with it. Then I started plugging in mics and listening, and they sounded awful. I expect to hear little bits of noise differences or frequency response differences with different preamps, different interfaces, different converters. This was not that. This sounded like there were some phase cancellation issues going on. It was atrocious. But I finally managed to update the firmware, which was kind of a finicky process for no particularly good reason, and that problem went away. It's a little suspicious to me, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But fine, it went away. So now I've got it all working. The inputs sound fine. There's nothing spectacular, but there's nothing bad. They sound perfectly usable. But I'm starting to notice as I plug in my MV7, not this mic, that I have to turn it up pretty loud. That's kind of expected, but I'm getting a little bit of noise. Almost what I thought might be RF interference, but came to later discover was more like power line interference, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later too. But it only seemed to happen at higher gain settings, like 30 dB or more of gain. Odd. So I started listening more, and let me swap to something here real quick so you can see what I am talking about. All right, so right here, let me undo that so you can see these. This one, this top one, I recorded with the Revelator, and all of these spots here are as I increase it every 10 decibels of gain. And I want to be clear, this other one, this is from the Evo 8 from Audient. It does that as well, but you can't really see it on this. I increased these by similar amounts of gain. This is just with a mic plugged in, no talking, no nothing, just so I could try to get an accurate picture of the noise floor. Don't take these as scientific. They're not even remotely, but they give me a decent idea of what the noise profile is like. And as you can see, every 10 decibels or so, well, exactly 10 decibels actually, the audio starts out relatively no noise, increases, cuts way back down. Low noise, increases, cuts way back down. I thought this was kind of weird behavior. It indicates probably that they're using multiple stages of gain, so each one of these would be a gain stage. But kind of expectedly, as you get up towards the top, you get a whole lot more noise. Now, I do want to be clear here. This is after adding 50 decibels of gain just so I could see what was going on. All of this is totally usable. It doesn't look usable on this graph because it's so exaggerated, but you're never going to hear this in practice because your microphone level is going to be way, way, way higher than that. Still, I do think it's important to note that it is more noise than a nicer interface like the Audient Evo here would have. What's not pictured here is that power line interference, because for whatever reason, when I went to record this, despite the fact that I had exchanged the interface, so this was actually on the second Revelator, that I had swapped out cables, I moved to different computers, different rooms in my house, ran the cables all sorts of different ways. This particular day, it just decided to not have that noise. Odd. So I started experimenting, and what I found is that it seems even more susceptible to power line interference than any other interface that I have tried. And by that, I mean, I expect that when I run an XLR cable, even though it's a balanced cable, even though I'm using well-shielded cables, I'm using like Mogami Gold cables, this is a custom-built cable using Conair quad-core cable. These are all nice cables. But I still expect that you do have to observe some basic things. You don't run it in parallel with any power lines, only cross perpendicularly, and generally try to keep it away from power lines as much as possible. So I did that. But I was picking it up if it ran anywhere near any power cables. Even my USB cable that I used to charge my wireless mouse was triggering it. I think that was probably the biggest triggering factor. All right, I have my Shure MV7 plugged in. The gain is set at 42 on the XLR input right now. I don't have anything turned on, none of the fat channel stuff, no processing is enabled. And I'm going to be quiet just to clear the noise floor at 42 dB of gain. I'm going to turn it up just a little bit now. So this is around 51 dB of gain. I'm still not peaking because I'm talking quieter, but you can hear interference I'm talking about. I'm going to turn it down to 30. All right, so it's much quieter now, so I'll get a little bit more up on the mic. I'm now going to switch back and forth between 29 and 30 dB so you can hear what I think is switching gain stages. And when I got the Evo, I took the same mic, the same cable, and I shoved them right up against my power strip. And the only way I could get that same power line interference was taking the capsule of the microphone and pointing it directly at the power plug. It's pretty weird that it's so much more obvious in the Revelator. So that's two weird things. The third weird thing is just for fun. I wanted to try out this mic with this. This is a relatively expensive tube microphone preamp. I accept that this is not a typical use case for someone to have a $180 interface and a $1,000 tube preamp that they want to plug into it. But nevertheless, that's what I have. So I plugged it in. And using the balanced line input in the combo jack on the Revelator, I always got some hum. Now, it's a tube preamp. I expect there to be some hum, but this was a lot of hum. It was very obvious. And even with the microphone at normal gain settings, I could hear it. So I tried flipping the phase switch, got worse. Weird. I tried flipping the ground lift switch, it got worse. Weird. And now that I have the Evo, I've plugged it into that. Totally fine. Doesn't matter if I flip any of the switches, there's no hum in any positions. I don't need to use the ground lift. All of this leads me to believe that something about the way PreSonus has dealt with their balanced inputs is not properly balanced. The whole point of a balanced cable is to cancel out that sort of noise as you recombine the signals. There's essentially, I'm not going to get too into detail here. I'm not an electrical engineer. I haven't opened up the Revelator to confirm any of this. This is just my thoughts. Let's switch back to the full screen cam here. But this is just what I think. So you have one sine wave. Let's say, we're just going to use sine waves as an example. It goes up and then down. You take the exact same signal, flip it 180 degrees, so it goes down and then up. And so the idea here is that you take your microphone signal and you do that. You flip them 180 degrees out of phase, and then anything that gets picked up along the way, any noise, will actually appear the same in both of those. So when you recombine them, it will cancel itself out because you're flipping it and canceling it. So I have to wonder if maybe something is going on where that is just not working. That's my thoughts about the preamp. None of that is a deal breaker. As long as you run your cables carefully, ideally keep your gain below 30 dB. So either use a condenser mic, or if you're using an SM7B, an MV7, a low sensitivity dynamic microphone, maybe get a FetHead or a cloud lifter, or just be very careful about running your cables. You might be okay there. But that's not the only issue. Boy, if that was the only issue, I probably would have dealt with it. And I did deal with it for a while. I thought I was going to keep it. There's some other minor issues, though. Many of them, I think, can be fixed by PreSonus via software updates. Some of them not so much. It's got a kind of subpar headphone output. And by that, I mean, it sounds fine, but it's fairly high impedance, which is unfortunately pretty typical of a lot of audio interfaces. It's about 22 ohms of output impedance as far as I know. That means that your sort of studio headphones, like my HD560S, will be fine because those are about 150 ohm impedance headphones. Anything like a sensitive IEM, I have the IE300 from Sennheiser. Those are only a 16 ohm IEM, and they're very sensitive, which means I can hear noise from that headphone amp when I plug them in. And it's also kind of runs the risk of distorting the actual amplifier, not the headphones, the amplifier, because it's too high impedance. The impedance is above the IEM impedance. I didn't really hear any, so again, minor issue. It's a very small amount of noise, and it's probably only really present if you're using IEMs. It's still not great for when you're using a gaming headphone, if that's all you have, because those tend to be around 32 ohms, and you really want to be around 8 times the output impedance of the amplifier, which would put you at 150, 160 ohms, give or take. Okay, so again, not a deal breaker. It's annoying for me because I like to plug my IEMs in, but fine, whatever. Some other little minor nitpicks before I get into some of the bigger stuff. The bottom feet on the underside are not rubber. They're almost like a cloth material, so it will slide around your desk. Weird choice, never seen that before, fine, whatever. The XLR input is on the front instead of the back. So in terms of cable management on your desk, it's pretty annoying. Again, not the end of the world, but it's annoying. As far as something for streamers go, it doesn't have any buttons on it that actually mute the mics. You can mute your speaker output, not your headphone output, only the speaker output out the back. So that's kind of a waste of a button for most streamers. I could see that potentially being useful in a studio setting, but not so useful for streamers. You get 2 preset buttons, which just allow you to turn your processing on and off or switch between 2 sets of processing. Fairly useless. So we have a bunch of buttons on there that essentially are not going to ever be used, and no mute buttons for the mics. This is a bit of a problem because the virtual mixer, the universal control software that comes with the io44, the mute buttons in there only affect the audio coming out of your virtual mixes. If that's what you happen to be using in OBS, that's okay, but you have to click on the mute button in Universal Control. If you use a Stream Deck or your laptop or computer has a mute button for the mic built into it, that button does not mute the mics in the virtual mixes in Universal Control. That button only affects the Windows audio driver, not the ASIO driver, or ASIO, however you want to say it. So if you are using the stream mixes, your mic will not mute when you hit the mute button on the Stream Deck. Maybe that's a good thing for you. For me, it was pretty annoying. So I ended up not putting my mic into any of my stream mixes and just running it separately into OBS so that I could mute it with my laptop's mute button, because that will mute it both in OBS and in Discord. So when I'm recording a video call, it mutes it in both places. Whereas it will not mute it either of those places if I'm just using the mute button in Universal Control. So that's pretty frustrating. And a possible downside of not having hardware mute buttons, for example. Not to keep talking up this interface, but the Evo 8, it has the option using buttons on the interface to mute the inputs, and it mutes it, whether it's through the ASIO or the Windows driver. Both of them get muted. So that works great. So then, fine, whatever. I got all that set up, made it work so that I could mix Discord and my computer audio in a stream mix, send that to OBS, and then send my mic separately to OBS. Fine, I got it to work, but it kind of felt like, well, what was the point of the virtual mixes then? I could just send Discord to a separate output and mix it all in OBS. Whatever. But then the problem is, I like to leave the interface plugged into my computer. I don't unplug it every time I turn off my computer, normally. But when you do that, every time you boot up your computer, none of your mix settings are applied to the interface until you interact with the mix in some way or unplug and plug it back in. It seems to not respect the fact that you just booted up your computer and it should push it. When you open up the virtual mix, it looks like it seems to think that those are the correct settings, but that's not what's actually happening on the device. There's sort of a disconnect there. So I ended up, just to make it easier, unplug it every time I turn off the computer, plug it back in after everything boots up and Universal Control launches. That, hopefully, I did report that to them. They seem to think that I'm crazy and making that up, but I reported that to them, and hopefully that's an issue that they will actually look at and get fixed. My experience overall with their customer support has not been great, so I don't have high hopes for that, but I think that is a fixable issue. All right, so I have my mic plugged in, but I, at the time, was using the MV7, so in order to get around the power line interference, I bought a FetHead, which was another $100. So I'm at $280 expenses, but you know, whatever, I got it working, it's fine. Okay, now I apply the processing to my mic, but oh, the mute's kind of weird, so I have to separate it in OBS anyway, so why am I even using the virtual mixes? Fine, whatever. Oh, great, every time I reboot my computer, I have to unplug it and plug it back in. Fine, I'll deal with that. But the reality is that the effects aren't even that great. It just uses the fat channel processing, which comes with Studio One, and there is something very cool about that. All of the settings that you would set up in Studio One, you can literally just copy and paste. When you open up Studio One, all of that processing is available for you to edit right in the software, as opposed to having to go into a control panel to do it. And I think that's really cool. That's an integration that no other interface that I'm aware of, at least, can talk about. And that's pretty cool. It's very convenient, and it makes it so that if you've seen my videos where I talk about recording yourself, doing your processing, and then taking those settings over into OBS, you don't really have to do that. You can record yourself, make the processing, and then just copy and paste it. And that's very cool. But all of these things, all of these effects can just be applied in OBS. As I've talked about in those videos, you can use the replugs, and those are free. And generally speaking, I think they are better. I mean, the noise gate is fine, but unfortunately, the noise gate and the compressor available in the fat channel here don't have input meters. And you've seen me talk about this in the other videos. I hope you've seen that. You have this input meter. And as I play back the audio, I can see exactly where my level is at and set the threshold accordingly. Boop. In universal control, down here is the only place where I get to see these meters. And yet, you're not going to hear this. I don't have it running through OBS. It's just any way you wouldn't want to hear it. So you kind of have to guess where exactly it's falling and then do this. They don't have these handy dandy numbers that show up, so you can't really get a proper gauge of where your signal's falling. You're just kind of guessing at best, and then setting your threshold. That's annoying. I frankly think that that is unacceptable for any compressor or noise gate. It needs to have this meter so I can easily see what to do. That's probably subjective, but that's how I think about that. And the other end of that situation is, yeah, you can apply them to your mic signal so that wherever you send it, you've got those effects applied, but apps like Discord have volume normalization built in. It's just a checkbox that you can check and uncheck. You don't really need to have the compressor turned on your mic at all times. And you can apply all this processing in OBS or after the fact. If you're going to make a YouTube video, you can apply it there. So the only thing that you're really getting out of that situation is if, let's say, you're a speedrunner and you're going to be on GDQ, Games Done Quick, and you're dialing in remotely because it's been the middle of COVID pandemic and you can't really do it in person, or you live abroad and they have offered to let you dial in, whatever. So you want to make sure that all your processing is applied rather than just relying on them to do it. And that's fair. But that's about the only situation I could think of where that would be useful. And even then, you have to remember to turn off that volume normalization in Discord because you don't want to be doubling up on compression. All of that brings us to, should you buy this interface? And if not, and spoilers, the answer is probably not. What do you do instead? Well, as I said, I don't generally do product reviews. I don't want to tell you to buy something because I don't know what your needs are. But what I can say is that this is not the only product out there that has some of this capability. Elgato's Wave XLR does not have the additional inputs, but it does have one XLR input, and it does actually superior virtual routing. You get more channels to route, and you get VST support, so you can use the better plugins instead of relying on just the fat channel, because the universal control does not support VSTs, because PreSonus thinks you would only want to use their stuff. You could get something like the Audient Evo 4, which is not exactly analogous, but it is cheaper. The benefit that you get there is that it still has some virtual mixing capabilities, but you're not going to get quite as many hardware ins and outs. There's no effects processing available. My personal recommendation, if you have the desk space for it, would be the Evo 8 instead. That gives you 2 virtual outputs, a loopback functionality, 2 separate virtual mixes you can do if you really want to. And every mic channel can come in as a mono channel. So you can actually have all 4 inputs on 4 separate channels in OBS, which I have not seen on any other audio interface. Each one of those channels has its own button that can be used to mute that channel. So you just hold the button for like a second, basically, and it mutes it. So you can do that. And I think that's pretty great. I don't know enough about it to recommend it or not, but Razer has a solution now. And of course, there are the Go XLR options that have been on the market for a while, though I would probably stay away from the Mini, not because it's necessarily bad, but it does not have proper 48 volt phantom power. It only does 24 volt phantom power, and that's a problem for a lot of condenser mics. So I don't think it's super great from that standpoint. But if it suits your needs, go for it. It certainly would work just fine with a dynamic microphone. And of course, if you don't need the virtual mixing capabilities, or you're just going to use something like Voicemeeter, which is another option that will let you use any interface, then you can get things like the Motu M2 or M4 or any Focusrite interface, which are generally pretty well regarded. So you have a lot of options. With all that being said, now you know, and you can make an informed decision about whether or not it works for you. And I would like to reiterate that I don't think any of these issues are deal breakers. It can be made to work. If PreSonus gets their act together and fixes some of the software side issues, that will be a vast improvement. And ideally, they would update the hardware to fix some of those noise issues I've been talking about, but depending on the specific way you route your cables, you can get around it. But I think it speaks to a greater issue. So hopefully one day it will be a cooler device than it currently is. But today is not that day, and I don't recommend ever buying anything on based on what a product could be in the future. You should buy it on what it is now. And as it is now, there's better options for the same price or less. So anyway, that's all for my rant. That's all for this video. As always, do your best to make an informed decision and figure out what works for you. See you later.